In your book, you had at the end, I felt like it was very, very helpful in a very concise way to kind of frame a lot of these ideas that we're talking about. Basically, there were 10 tools for embracing our finitude. So I think for the remainder of our conversation, it'd be fun to kind of go through these 10 things if you're game. And
Sure.
yeah, maybe let's just start with that top one.
Right. Adopting a fixed volume approach to creativity. So on the first couple of these, as I say in the book, there's a certain amount of credit is due to Cal Newport, who I'm sure you and your listeners will be familiar with, the author of the book Deep Work and others, because he's sort of taken some of these into very specific practical directions. But what I'm really getting at here is just almost any approach to productivity and creativity is going to suit you better if it sort of starts with the amount of time you have and then proceeds to the question, what are the most important things to do with that time, rather than if it starts with the tasks and says, okay, somehow I've got to get through all these things in the next day or 6 months.
Right.
And I've just got to find a way. So if you sort of select time boxing, the obvious example of this, right? If you sort of decide what hours are going to be available to you in the day for work, or figure out what hours are available to you if there are other constraints on it, and then given that portion of time, figure out which things matter the most to do in that time, and sort of resign yourself to the fact that you're going to let the chips fall where they will when it comes to all the other stuff, right? Because the alternative to that is this kind of approach that I refer to in the book and other people call, clearing the decks. Get in the morning, first of all, try to deal with all outstanding little issues so you can get to this great expanse of time where you're going to be able to focus on your creating. And,
eat the frog.
happens.
Isn't that the term? Eat the frog.
Well, eating the frog, I think, is broadly, I'm a little bit rude about Brian Tracy in this book, who I associate with that phrase, but eating the frog is actually, I would say, is in tune with what I'm saying here, right? It's not necessarily do the most unpleasant thing first, but do the thing you care about the most first, even if it's not fun, I would say. So maybe that's not eating a frog, but there's something related here. And then just sort of any approach that involves limiting your work in progress, that involves taking everything that's on your plate and saying, okay, almost all of it is going to have to wait. These are the 4 things I'm doing right now. And I'm going to deal with the fact that I kind of wish I was doing 20 of them and it makes me feel anxious, but I'm going to deal with that and just do some of these. So a very simple approach that I outline in this section in the book is, one way you could do this is you just keep 2 to-do lists. One is kind of infinitely long. You add everything that's on your plate. It might have hundreds of items on it, sure. The other one has, let's say, 5 slots, and you move 5 items from the long list to the short one. And the rule is you don't get to move another one on until you've freed up a slot by doing one. So you're sort of creating this artificial bottleneck in your task flow, or you could do that on the level of projects. It's like only these 3 projects are getting my sort of primary attention. Obviously, people have all sorts of little bits of admin they have to do on day-to-day in addition. But there is the approach that also I'm sure people are familiar with, of the Kanban approach that's been adapted into this personal Kanban approach by a guy called Jim Benson, who I write about, where you sort of move Post-its across a board that's divided into columns, or you do the same in an app on your computer. All of these things, you can geek out for far too long on the specifics and end up wasting a year of your life just getting the productivity system in place. But all of them have this one fundamental principle that sure, there are 50 things you would like to do today and move forward on if you could, but you have to make a radical limit to how many you're actually going to try to move forward on, and not bring the other ones onto the plate until one of them is cleared. And you actually do, in aggregate, make a lot more progress this way, right? This is a more productive way to live. It's not just that it's less sort of mentally tormenting. Well, so if you try to work on all 50, what happens is every time one gets a little difficult, you just bounce off onto another one. So you never actually go through the difficult stuff.
Yeah, it's super focused, comparatively speaking. Because if you have infinite options, you don't go deep and get anything done on one or 2 of those things. So
Right, exactly. Yeah. Number 2?
Let's go to number 2. Yeah.
This is serialize. I guess that's actually very closely related. This is why I put them together to what we just discussed. But this is just the idea of, again, it's more of a sort of general shift than maybe a hyper-specific technique. But it's this idea of thinking of the work you do, especially when it comes to the major projects you do, as things that you do one at a time, and then you move to the next one, and then you move to the next one, and they have to like queue up, and you have to sort of be okay with the fact that they're queuing up. So one way to do this is to pick, if you possibly can within your work life, pick one major project that you're working on, and sure, you're going to have to spend part of the day on little stuff. No line of work, I think, is free of that. But you can say, in my case, for example, be like, okay, I'm going to write this chapter, and that is my focus for now. And I don't get to do these other 6 things that are really important to me until this chapter is written. And then I'm going to pick another one of these things and do that and move it through. And sure, maybe 2 hours a day have to be on email and a bunch of other stuff. It's not a sort of perfect system. And in fact, chasing perfectionism with it is kind of the same problem that we're talking about here. But, and you can even sort of do this with your whole life, right? You can sort of divide your life into sort of approximate domains: work, family, house and domestic kind of, home repairs, stuff like that, finances, and not too many domains, and sort of nominate one primary focus in each. In case you can't tell from the way I'm talking about these techniques, I never do feel super doctrinaire about like, here is my system, you must implement it.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like the people listening to this and people who are interested in stuff in general, they're easily smart enough to come up with techniques of their own. And they've also probably got about 50 pages, web pages bookmarked full of like 50 techniques. So that the important thing is seeing which ones play to this like fate, which ones sort of encourage you to sort of lean in a bit to the fact that you're finite, that it's uncomfortable, versus these ones, the very deceptive, dangerous ones that fuel this illusion that like next month, next year, you're finally going to get into this position of like being God, basically.
Yeah.
So I'm very fond of the way that Jessica Abel, who's a creativity coach and a graphic novelist, describes one version of this technique, which is just paying yourself first when it comes to time. This is an old bit of wisdom from personal finance, right? That if you want to save money or invest money, you should take off a bit of your paycheck or your income as soon as you get it, instead of
waiting till everything's
buying groceries and paying everything else and then hoping there's some left over. And she makes the same point, right? If there's something you really care about, you just have to like do a bit of it now, today.
That's good.
And not wait till, you've dealt with all the other demands on your time, because you never will get to this point of having dealt with all the other demands on your time.
Yeah. I've heard, that's such a good way to put it. I've heard Seth Godin put it in kind of a very similar, but he was talking about it more in like the terms of giving yourself the best time. And he's talking to people trying to build products and create things and things like that. But he kind of reoriented, like, instead of like planning your whole day around what you're busy with, so like if it's work or school or whatever's going on, plan it around what you want to plan it around, because the workday is only 8 hours long and you have 16 other hours to play with that you get to control that time, at least for most people. And obviously there are exceptions to that rule, but and he's like, you get to decide, you get to make these choices. And I think what she said as well, just like paying yourself first, making that kind of like, because it's so easy to just like walk through life checking off all these boxes all the time, and then before you know it, however much time has passed you, and you're like, I haven't done anything for me, and there's still this gnawing, frustrating feeling that I haven't achieved anything that I really want to, that's fulfilling to me. And so that idea of like, even just, for me, I always tell people, give yourself 10 minutes a day just to start. And because there's also just the hurdle of starting can feel scary, but it's like, man, if you just give yourself 10 minutes is all you need. And it's crazy what you can do in 10 minutes a day for a year's time if you just like do it. I know it's easier said than done, but
no, that's totally true. I'm a big believer in like getting ridiculously small with the time goal that you're aiming for, if it's hard to get started. The other thing that I'm sort of always going on about for people who are, for people whose work is in some sense creative or involves deep thinking or whatever, if you're doing this kind of thing as a full-time job, obviously it's different if you're trying to fit it in around other things, but like, you can own pretty much, I feel like the evidence is fairly clear, both anecdotally from all sorts of famous artists and authors and other scientists in history, but also from more sort of rigorous research. You can only really do that kind of deep, focused thinking work for 3 or 4 hours a day.
Yes.
Maximum.
Yeah.
And so, in the best case scenario here, in the worst case, 10 minutes, totally. But in the best case scenario here, like if you have total freedom over your day and you're lucky enough to make your main income from something creative and absorbing, as I am, like even then, just don't try and do it for 8 hours a day, because that is going to be such a frustrating and ultimately counterproductive approach. Right. And you've got plenty of things, or I have, that you need to be doing for work with the other hours anyway, just sort of shallower things that you can't get rid of, and more social things, meetings and conversations and things that you don't need quite the same level of silent focus for. So yeah, my schedule, when it's working well, it's basically just a question of ring fencing 3 or 4 hours each morning, trying very hard not to make appointments for those times.
Yeah.
And if I can do that and focus in that time and move the needle on something I'm working on, like that has to be counted a huge victory. Like that should not be seen as, what, you only did it for 3 hours? No, like
that's
not at all,
massive.
Because
3 hours. That's a huge
and it's the
deal.
best case scenario, I would like to stress.
Right.